in here. But this garden changes every season. It changes a lot. So here's another garden that's near me in the fruit vale here. This is a buckwheat here, another buckwheat. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's 6, 7 different buckwheats just in this one section of the garden. The red is, by the way, it's an epilobium or saucinaria with the California fuchsia, by the way. And this is an aster. And this white plant on the right is a plant I use a lot called the sand aster. There's another shot of that garden. We just did this about 3 or 4 years ago. We did this one. And it's going to be on tours. I think next year it'll be on some tours. Okay, this is the flowering currant on the left, golden bush in the middle, and then a Ceanothus Julia Phelps on the right there. Here's some buckwheats and coastal sage here, some irises. Very simple. This is another one. These grasses here in the middle, these are the leafy reed grass. I use a lot of these. I have a lot of them at the nursery right now too, which they can be difficult to find. So, and in the middle,
a native?
Yes, this is a native grass. It was discovered about 30 years ago, 35 years ago, by a friend of mine, Roger Rach, up in Mendocino, and I found the very same patch he discovered when he discovered it many years later when I was camping up there. I just got back there too, just yesterday. So.
Oh wow! How tall does it grow?
That grass, it doesn't grow very tall. The tallest it gets is about 1.5 foot tall, and about 2, maybe 2.5, 3 feet wide. So, and it's not invasive at all. So,
okay,
it's a real beautiful grass. Really, really nice. The one drawback of it is it tends not to persist over like 5-6 years. It tends to just disappear. So it's something that you have to sort of add now and then. But there is a new one that's a cross between this and the Nootka reed grass it's a natural hybrid that seems to persist really well, and it looks just like this, just a little bit bigger. So,
one question. I had some people worry about the seed heads and dogs. Any comments on that?
Not on this one. Not on this one. Not at all. There's some of the seeds of some plants, like the squirrel tail grasses, which I also use. Generally, dogs avoid them, but that one can be a little bit of a problem. But it's not as much as like some of the stipas. Some of the stipas can be really noxious for dogs. That the seeds can get got in their noses and really cause problems. But not these ones. Most grasses, no. There's only a couple that really you have to watch out for.
Thank you.
Can you state the name of that grass again?
The leafy reed grass.
Thank you.
Palmacrostus foliosa.
Great.
Keep track. So I use a lot of annuals in all my landscapes. That's a commercial landscape. This is a landscape for a home we did in San Jose. I love using buckeyes in my landscape. Besides the Fab 4, there's quite a few other things I like to use. So here, this is hummingbird sage on the other side of this fence here, which smells really wonderful. It has just beautiful, really sweet smell to it. And then on this fence, this fence here, we have growing an espalier, the evergreen currant, which is a really wonderful. I don't have any close-up shots of it. I should, but it's a wonderful evergreen cover for covering fences, and for covering all different types of things, either like a wall like this, or it's a nice ground cover as well, with shiny brown green leaves, little red flowers. There is another shot of it. So.
Sir, another question about the salvia, the hummingbird sage. It does kind of have a yucky winter look. Is that right?
All plants have their downtime. Okay. I just want to say that right off the bat. All plants have their downtime, or I should say most plants have their downtime. There's a few that don't, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But when the hummingbird sage starts to look bad, you just cut it to the ground and give it some water once, and that's it. And it'll come back and it'll be lush and beautiful again.
Great,
so
thanks.
It's very easy to take care of. This particular, you can see it in the lower right-hand corner here. This garden, we were able to keep it looking just beautiful year-round just by doing that. And it was in San Jose, so we only maintained it about 3 times a year we would go. And we were able to keep it lush and green just by visiting 3 times a year, cutting it down when it looks bad, giving it some water, and forgetting about it.
Thanks.
Very easy. This is some of our hardscape work that we've done. We use a lot of found objects, and we mix a lot of different materials. So we do a lot of stonework, a lot of patios and stuff like that. This is a really big manzanita here. It's now it's probably twice as big as this now. But it's a Dr. Hurd manzanita. It's just up the road from me here. And the flowering tree on the left there, that's a desert willow, which is a really beautiful, it's not a willow at all. It's not related to willows at all, but it's called the desert willow. It's a chalopsis. So here's another garden in San Jose we did. Another shot of it.
How tall does the desert willow grow?
They can get quite big. You know, I expect them to get 20 feet generally in gardens. They can get a little bit bigger. You can withdraw water completely from them and they'll stay a little smaller and still be beautiful too. They don't need the water.
Are they multi-trunk or single trunk?
They're better multi-trunk. I've seen them grown as single trunk, but I don't personally like them that much that way.
Okay.
This yellow flower here is a buckwheat. This is a Shasta sulfur buckwheat. This is the beach daisy. There's a bunch of different things in here. Another garden we did in Hayward Hills. We put in these red doors here as the entrance. This garden in the front here is kind of mixed, although most of what you see is native. The red, once you go through the red doors, it's all native. And this woman, this client of mine, she's lost pretty much everybody in her family in the last few years, and it's been a very difficult time for her. And she called me recently and said that the garden has been her savior. You know, she goes and spends a lot of time in the native garden, and just the birds and the insects, and there's just so much to see all the time there, and it's always changing. So there's a lot of, I didn't prepare anything, but there's a lot of reasons to grow natives. And I imagine that you're probably familiar with some of them. But, you know, the main thing is that they are part of the local ecosystem, and they support the local ecosystem. Gardens, native gardens in the city and stuff, they're like bridges between native ecosystems, and that allow birds and insects and stuff to cross over from one to the other. And we are in the middle of a very urgent situation of the insect apocalypse, they're calling it. But we're losing many of our insects many of them are becoming endangered and going extinct at an incredible rate right now. So we're really encouraging people to grow natives because the difference is amazing. You'll get, you know, the insects and critters that depend on one single species is 40 and up, whereas you get a non-native and it's 0 to 10. You know, so there's a huge difference. But those are the things that actually depend on them. So, and these four have many different. They provide larval species for many things, which is what supports our birds, our songbirds particularly. So there's many reasons to grow natives besides being beautiful. So here's an entryway to. This is my first native landscape that I did like as a business about 20 years ago, and it's here in Oakland, and it's still looking good. It's changed a little bit.
Is that a ceanothus? What?
Yeah, that's a Ray Hartman. That's a Ray Hartman. That's a very dependable tree-like ceanothus. And see how we prune it up to make it into a shade tree so that we can grow an understory underneath it. And in the back is a madrone, closely related to manzanita, which is, you're probably familiar with the Pacific madrones, but this is our native madrone. I think it's one of the most beautiful trees in the world. I'll go more into that later on. So here's more annuals that I use. And the annuals, really, the key for using annuals is timing, when you put the seed out, and also, you know, get quantities of seed and really grow quantities of them. And they don't, you know, so to prepare, you just clear an area of all weeds. They'll grow in pretty much anything depending on what kind you're looking to grow. But I find the best surface to grow them in that they'll reseed regularly and do really well with is decomposed granite. You just put a 2-inch layer down after removing weeds and put the seeds in that and rake it in, and you get this. It's pretty easy. So I just wanted to mention that I do a lot of unusual things with trees and shrubs too in landscaping. We do a lot of experimentation. Like this entryway here up in the hills here is a cutout entryway, and we planted a buckeye there. Buckeyes are really neat because a California buckeye, because they tend to really fill the space that you give them. and they self-prune. If they get friction by touching in one direction, they'll move in the other direction. So they self-prune, but they can be really beautiful too. So here's another shot of the first garden that we did. This is a coffee berry here with some licorice ferns underneath it. This in the background is a lupin that grew to 12 feet tall. That's not usual, but
Oh, wow.
with an 8-inch trunk on it. So, and a cat lived in it. It was
Wow.
bizarre. So, another big lupin here. This was quite a few years ago. This is from the house looking outwards. This big yellow flowering thing here, this is a canyon sunflower. It's the only sunflower that flowers beautifully in full shade. So it makes a nice shrub. So here we have some sages and buckwheats. These are rosy buckwheats. Looks like mixing with the coastal buckwheat. Buckwheats we have, it's one of the most proliferous species that we have inside the genus of buckwheat, which is Eriogonum. There's something like 200 species native to California. And they tend to cross really easy. It's very easy to get new buckwheats, which I'll talk about more later on. Here's a small Vermontodendron. Here, this is one, it's a smaller one called, what's it called? Something Taylor.
Yeah, Ken Taylor.
Ken Taylor, thank you. And underneath it is a John Dowerly manzanita, which is one of my favorite ground cover manzanitas. Just looking up into an oak in spring. This is a valley oak in spring. I love oaks too. And this is a large manzanita up on Mount Diablo. This is the Glauca, the big berry manzanita.
Is that an oak or a manzanita?
This is a manzanita here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And the big berry manzanita, I'll get into it a little bit more in a bit. But, this is one called the Refugio manzanita. And many of the manzanitas have these beautiful oranges and reds that come out in the leaves at different times of the year. And I'll show more pictures of those later. But I really like the Refugio. It's from down south, but it's faster to propagate and faster to grow than most of the manzanitas. Most manzanitas are slow. They really require patience, and they're worth it. So, and one piece of information that's good to know is if it weren't for manzanitas, we would not have year-round hummingbirds in California, nor as many species. But they feed on manzanitas flower in the wintertime, and the hummingbirds really depend on them, as do the red admiral butterflies and a bunch of other species too. So, and look, you can even have Christmas manzanitas.
Wow, yeah. Right in.
Castro Valley. And this is in San Jose. This is a Dr. Hurd here. This is like much bigger. It's like a small tree now, or actually a medium-sized tree now. And underneath it here, this is a really nice ground cover sage, which I love to use, Sonoma sage. I'll get into more of it later on. One thing I wanted to mention, that the real beauty in manzanitas is that you don't, when you plant a manzanita, most people just plant the manzanita and leave it in their yard, and that's fine, you know, but generally you're gonna just have a big green ball in the middle of your yard, or whatever color the leaf is. Some of the leaves are orange, sometimes they're almost white, but whatever, you'll have just a big blob in the middle of the yard. But when you start to prune them, that's when the real beauty of them comes out, because you can see their structure and their bark. A mature manzanita only has leaves on the tips of the branches. Okay, so you have to know how to prune them correctly too. And there's two different ways to prune, and one of them is you remove the branch entirely. Okay, like down on below here, you can see where they were removed. You remove the branch entirely to show off the trunk. Okay, I like planting big ones near paths or driveways or whatever, because they force the owner to prune them after a few years. But I just tell people you need to know what you're doing when you're pruning these. Okay, you have to have your pruners super clean. You need to clean them with Clorox between every single different plant that you prune when you're pruning manzanitas, and they should be done in the midsummer. And you remove the branch completely, or to keep them a little bit more compact, you can cut within the leafy zone, which could be only a few inches at the ends of the branches. But when they're young, it's usually several feet that you have a leafy zone. You have to prune right in the middle, or really in the top part of that somewhere. And then that way you can keep, for some of the manzanitas, you can make them more compact and more, just more shapely, if you like. But some of the manzanitas you don't want to prune at all, really. at all except for removing branches. As I said, some of the leaves are very white. This is a very glaucous color on a glauca, the big berry manzanita. This is a Lewis Edmonds, and this is late in the flowering season. The way I can tell that is, well, there's always a profusion of flowers when they're flowering, but they're much pinker. They can be really almost all pink in the beginning of the season, and then towards the end of the season, their flowers turn white. A lot of plants have the opposite, where they go white to pink, but this goes from pink to white on most manzanitas. This is the largest manzanita I'm aware of, and that's me. I found it up on Cedar Mountain near Livermore about, I don't know, about 15, 20 years ago, and the Chronicle did a big expose on it, or they did a big article, a four-page article with colored pictures and everything. It was pretty cool. And they, but I was trespassing when I found it, and so I got in a bit of trouble there. But the this one is 36 feet tall, with a trunk 6 feet around. So, and we estimated it was somewhere around 400 or 500 years old, and all around it was a forest of big berry manzanitas that were all around 15 feet tall, so we could figure out like what the burn season was. Manzanitas are adapted to fire more than anything. That's what determines where they are and how they grow, is fire. And a lot of them don't even reproduce at all until there's been a fire. But we could tell that this one had a fire about 45 years ago that burned where the forest was all around us. And then but these survived the fire. There's a few of them in this canyon here that survived the fire, and that's how they got so huge. They survived many flat fires. These ones in the canyon that was slightly moister in the middle. And I tell people also, if a branch dies on your manzanita, just leave it. Don't cut it. You can spread some of the pathogens that hurt them. Besides, over time, the leaves will fall off, the bark falls up, and they turn very white, and they're just part of the beauty of manzanitas. So just sort of adapt yourself to what their needs are, and you'll have much better luck with them. Here's the Refugio again with some bright orange foliage. The foliage in this one, this is the Bolinus manzanita. I really love the foliage in this. It's very similar to another one that is the King Mountain one. That's another local one here in the Bay Area that has very, very furry leaves like this. It gets very tree-like. Most of these are very rare species, very rare and endangered species. So, oops, I'll get more into manzanitas later on, so I'm jumping around a bit. But things to grow around manzanitas, snowberries are one that's very easy. Cal fescue is a very nice one to grow, very hair-like, very, very easy and fast to get a good ground cover of it.
Which fescue is this?
This is Cal fescue, California fescue.
Oh, okay.
And it's one of our larger grasses, so they get pretty big. Here's some in a landscape I did in the Oakland Hills here, along with irises. This is a ground cover of strawberries, of coast strawberry in the front. So
Is this woodland strawberry?
No, this is coast strawberry.
Coast.
Yeah. Even though it's in the shade here, but coast, both of them do great in the sun or the shade. So they really are very flexible with both the woodland and the coast.
Okay.
Here's the Virginiana. This is the Sierra strawberry here with glaucous leaves in this one. So this is Heuchera in the front here, Heuchera rubescens. Just different. This is another one of the leafy reed grasses in this pot. And here's that, these are great for under manzanitas or around them. This is a canyon sunflower. And then these are the California sword ferns. These are often found around manzanitas too. And this is my favorite one to use around manzanitas because this is the licorice fern on the right, and on the left is the California polypody fern. I like both of them a lot. But they really provide seasonal interest because they tend to disappear in the summer, and then in the first sign of rain in the fall, they come shooting back up quickly. They spread fairly quickly. Excuse me. But they're not at all invasive. They're really beautiful. For a really large home that we worked on the landscape last year over in the Danville area, we did this. We planted several thousand of these. They said that in the wintertime, at the beginning, throughout the winter, the place was just dead looking. They wanted something to really liven it up. And she, the woman called me a couple months ago and said that how happy they were with it. Because we just planted these throughout all the different shrubbery and stuff that's kept very, very manicured and pruned and stuff. We just put these all between them and they just filled in very, very lush. So it looks really beautiful now. So, and here it is planted at the base of a coffee berry, but I plant it like this at the base of manzanitas all the time too. And see how they fill in really nicely with some boulders. And then this is some miner's lettuce here. So, and here's some other manzanitas. There's many manzanitas. Manzanitas can come in all different sizes. There's a couple of them that are only an inch or two tall. And then there's many, many different ground cover ones. This is one of them. It's the Arctostaphylos edmundsii, or the little Sir manzanita. There's like 6 or 7 different selections of this, and this is one of them called Winter Glow that turns orange. And it tends to, it's not really predictable. It doesn't just turn orange in the winter. It tends to be green for a few years, and then it turns orange, and it stays orange for many years. So, and it's sort of orange and green, and it can alternate back and forth, but it's very pretty, very nice ground cover. Growing here with a local endangered species. This is a Colville's lip fern, which I love using the combination.
Is that how wide does it spread? Like if you for spacing?
Well, this is just one. This is one plant, and it is kept pruned. This is a commercial space here. This one is kept pruned to not get too wide, but it can get 6-8 feet wide. And about 8 inches or 10 inches tall. It could get taller than that over time if you let it, but this one, I'm sure that they'll keep it low like this. Yeah, here's the same thing. This is Winter Glow when it turns really orange. And I love to use, really, I wanted to mention this also, that what's much more important than individual species is the combinations that you use. And if you use the right combinations, you can get so many wonderful effects. And with red and orange plants, I love to use white plants, white-leaved plants along with them. This is a conejo buckwheat, which I use a lot of these. I really love these. They turn sulfur yellow too, but it works really well. This is a raised garden that we did for a designer who had the front yard was only like 5 feet deep. It was very, 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 very tiny. So we built a raised bed and then had all rock garden things in the raised bed. And this is it. So I'll show more pictures of it later. I think I have some. So, and I also wanted to mention that manzanitas, they grow their entire lifespan. So if you just leave them be, they can, even the ground cover ones can get quite tall. This is emerald carpet here on the right. It's been allowed to grow for a few, for about 10 years or so. And it's about a foot and a half tall here. And on the left, this one is now it's over 6 feet tall. This is emerald carpet, but it's 75 years old. And this is at the home of the man who introduced emerald carpet. So emerald carpet is a hybrid between Uva ursi and edmundsii. This is another edmundsii called Big Sur. This is a manzanita that I use more than any other in landscapes. And it does great in pots too. I grow a lot of them in containers. The first slide, I think, had one in a large one that I've had for over 10 years in a container. This one was in a container for about 8 years or so. But the flowers at the beginning of the year are pink and then they turn white. Although some years they can be all white. It's pretty bizarre. A lot of manzanitas are like that. They'll have flowers that are very, very pink one year and then white the next. So it's and we don't know why that is. So, but it tends to affect all of them. You'll see one year will be all the manzanitas that usually have pink flowers have white flowers one year. And then the next year, a lot of them will be pink. So go figure. But this one, Big Sur, is a really nice size. The mature one, here's a mature one that is getting mature. It's been pruned up a little bit to show off the trunk here, but it's only about 3 or 4 feet tall. And it flowers like crazy. It has more flowers than any other manzanita I know of. And for a longer period too. This is at the nursery. So, and another really nice ground cover is John Dowerly. And this is one generally for really big spaces. Although manzanitas aren't difficult to keep pruned. You don't have to prune them a lot because they're fairly slow. But John Dowerly will cover a very large area. It'll get 10, 12 feet across. and it's dense enough that no weeds can get through it. So, and I'll talk a bit more later about a plan that we have also for the back 40, when people have very large yards but that are just filled with weeds. There are solutions to that using natives, and this is one of the plants that we use a lot because it covers such a large area so densely and reasonably fast. So, please feel free to ask me questions if you have questions as we go along. But
Hey,
this
Pete,
flower, yes.
John Darley, in a situation I know, it was kind of this green mound and it got really tall. Is it a prunable version of a manzanita or should it not?
Very prunable, very prunable, very easy to prune that one. Yeah.
Thank you.
So it's very prunable. These ones can grow up to about 4 feet tall, but it's a tall ground cover. But you can also keep it pruned to shorter. But any of the manzanitas that have leafy stems throughout can be pruned to keep them small. So it's just that you got to watch that the tips of the branches. If the leaves are only on the tips, then don't prune those much. Or if you prune them below the leaves, they'll die. That branch will die. So.
And how long does it take to get to full size? Like.
Okay. Well, there's full size is the full size that you see like at a nursery or online or whatever is the mature size or whatever. That's one thing. But once again, manzanitas grow their entire lifespan, so they can get much bigger than what I'm saying. But I would say a mature size of a John Dowerly would be 6 to 8 feet across and 3 feet tall.
Okay.
This is another the Edmundsii cross. This one is green sphere. This is the slowest growing manzanita. Very, very tiny, very pretty leaves, very tiny and very dense. And it's very interesting shrub, this one too. And you can also prune it like a little bonsai too, very easily, just by removing some of these branches along the edges. And we'll probably do that with that one once it's a little older. Buxifolia is another ground cover. I'm covering mostly ground covers here in this part, but this one is the Buxifolia. This is a very, very tough manzanita that really survives for a very, very long time. A lot of these manzanitas can grow for hundreds and hundreds of years. In fact, the Edmundsii, the parent of this one here, there's like 6 or 7 different selections, and they grow very differently. Some of them are very flat. The winter glow is one also, and some of them grow into taller shrubs like this one to 4 feet or so. But they're all genetically exactly the same because there's only one parent in the wild, and it's several acres in size. And depending on where on that you take your cuttings, you'll get very different results. So, I mean, even right down to the winter glow has orange leaves at certain times, and for long periods of time. That's genetically exactly the same as this one, which doesn't. So anyway, I find that interesting. This is a really nice one for containers or for just a shady area too. This one can take a fair amount of shade, although manzanitas in general are full sun. And by full sun, I mean full from morning till night, you know. But then again, most manzanitas can take sun half a day or more, I should say. But a few of them, like this one, John Dowerly, also can take a little bit more shade than that. But I wouldn't do a whole lot more shade than that. They tend to, the healthier they are, the more sun they get in general. So this is the Sunset Manzanita, really nice cultivar. It gets nice color in it, changes. This is a very old Franciscan Manzanita at Tilden Botanical Garden. The Franciscan usually it's very, very small, but this is the same species that they rediscovered in Golden Gate Park a few years ago. I'm not sure if you heard about it. And then they had a multi-million-dollar moving of it because they built a road right through it. So, and then here's another thing that's not a manzanita. I wanted to sprinkle in a bunch of other things too, just because the choices are so limitless. But this is sugar bush. This is another really tough, beautiful shrub for the garden that is a great pollinator plant, and it's great for the seeds on this. Once the flowers go by, this is the flower. This is before flowering. They have this pink color for a very long time, and they flower white. But then once the flowers are gone by, you get the seeds, which are these kind of a little bit sticky, juicy seeds like that you can either suck on them as they are, and they taste like lemons, or you can make lemonade with it, and it's really delicious and loaded with ascorbic acid and vitamin C. So
How tall does this one grow?
these can get about 10 feet tall. They get taller and larger in the inland areas. Like, so from here, I'm speaking from Oakland, California, from Oakland, from the hills east around Mount Diablo and stuff, these can easily get 12, 14 feet around.
And are they flowering now, or?
They're flowering now, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they've been flowering for about 2 months now. So it's a very long flowering. Well, this is before the flower, they get this pink color. And then they turn this, pink and white, or red and white, and then white.
Okay.
And they get
So
the
is
red seeds.
That one, is the sugar bush locally native to Mount Diablo? Because I thought it was a
No,
southern.
it's not.
Yeah.
It's from down south. It's from like Central California south. Yeah, I find a lot of them around what's that town? Oh, I forget the name of it. But Holon, Jolon. I find a lot of them around there. So there's a close relative of this is the lemonade berry, which is also, and the lemonade berry is found generally more coastal, and the sugar bush is generally more inland. So, but they're both fabulous to use. The lemonade berry can be pruned into hedges and stuff too, whereas this one really, you kind of want to let it do its thing. So the silk tassels, I love using silk tassels. The first time I saw these was in England being used, and they were the California silk tassels, the coast silk tassel from California. But people love using silk tassels and ceanothus in England. I was like 12 or 13 when I was living there, but it's really, they're so popular over there, much more so than here, which is such a shame because they're beautiful here and they really feed the ecosystem here, and they don't there. Here we used it around this bench. But they're very elegant. They flower in the wintertime. These are the flowers. These are the male flowers, the really long flowers like this. It's the male flowers. So most of the ones that are available at nurseries and stuff are the male ones because they have the long tassels. But the female ones are really neat too. They have more like grape-like clusters of seeds that are really attractive too. So this is a styrax, which I use a lot of these in landscapes too. Very, very drought tolerant, very tough, small shrub, medium shrub. And it gets beautiful flowers like this. It's just starting to flower now. And the flowers are fragrant, like sort of a vanilla nutmeg smell to them.
How about sun requirements?
What?
I was going to ask about the sun requirements.
This could take like half, maybe even less than half sun. It could take a fair amount of shade. I've seen them growing under oaks, but they definitely get, a number of hours of direct sun as well. So where there's some exposure. So I would say half sun, half shade.
Pete, are they slow growing?
A little bit, not too bad. Generally, for natives, the old adage where, the first year it sleeps, the second year it creeps, and the third year it jumps, something like that. But that adage really goes for natives more than anything. They haven't been, hybridized and stuff to get the fastest ones to, growing and stuff like that. We just haven't been using them in landscapes for nearly as long as we've been using Asian plants and European plants. So I'm just saying, be patient with your plants in your garden, with your native plants. This is a Vermontodendron californica. We have a lot of these right now too, but these are wonderful. They need zero care whatsoever once established. This is in the top of the Oakland Hills. This hasn't seen water or pruning in years and years, and it still just does this every year. And
is it true that do they have to be supported like with a wall or something, or can they be planted anywhere?
It depends on on the conditions that it had when it was young. Okay, when it was young, which the roots on all plants, the way that a plant becomes drought resistant is, for the most part, for most of them, they grow roots that are very, very deep that get down into where it stays moist year round. And if the Vermontodendron received shallow water on a regular basis or something, or just a little bit of water on a regular basis, either through fog or through, you know, being watered occasionally or something, then the roots will stay shallow and it won't anchor well to the ground. So I always say with these ones, it's best to plant at the beginning of the rainy season. You know, you can buy them whenever and just hold on to it, plant it at the beginning of the rainy season, and then make sure that when you water it in the beginning, you're just watering it infrequently but deeply. And when you plant, pretty much everything I tell people to do this with, but you want to dig your hole, fill your hole with water 3 times and let it drain through, even if it takes a long time. But that gives you a good column of moist soil to direct the roots downwards, okay? And that makes these much stronger, and they can hold up to all kinds of winds. But a lot of times if they're just getting fog, they're gonna have very shallow roots, and so they're gonna not be strong enough. But it's that first year that's really critical for really pointing the roots downwards. You can do it, you can really train it by watering it, say, once every 3 weeks or 4 weeks, fairly deeply, and then forget about it the rest of the time, okay? You can only do that the first year. After that, you want to really just leave it alone, okay? But then by then you should have, you know, trained the roots to go down deeply. There's many different selections of Vermontodendrons that have a lot of different looks to them. This one here is decumbens. This is one that when I get them, you know, I get a lot of them, and they're not cheap, but they're really beautiful. But this is a decumbens, or the pine hill fennel bush. This one only grows to about 4 feet tall and gets these beautiful orange-red flowers. Oops. And this one you want to grow under oaks in the partial shade, where maybe they get an hour of direct sun late in the day. They can take a lot of shade, this one. And they look just beautiful when they're flowering. So very, very easy and long lived. So now the ceanothus, the California lilacs. So these are well known around the world. I love like experimenting with the backgrounds of plants, like having certain, you know, house colors and stuff, and growing certain plants in front of them. This is one that is interesting.
Which one is this?
This is a dark star. Dark star prunes up really nice into a small tree. However, you know, dark stars are really gorgeous. They're really fantastic looking when they're flowering and stuff. But they are, a group of ceanothuses are short-lived. Only a group of them. Most of them are not. But the Julia Phelps and the dark stars are fairly short-lived. They tend to really start to go downhill after about, you know, 7 to 10 years, really. So you have to replant those ones, or they often reseed and come up on their own. So, and they're much better off, and they live longer. They'll live more like 10, 15 years if you never water them, okay, after they're established. But if you're going to water, expect 7 to 10 years if they're around other things that get water. To me, it's like a lot of people change their landscapes like, you know, I change clothes. So I don't think that's that big of a deal. The reason why they're short-lived like this is that they're from stock. Their parent species, whatever they came from, are ones that come up after a fire goes through. It's the first things that come up are this kind of a ceanothus, and it'll spread over. They'll come up like crazy in a really dense wall of ceanothus. And whereas other ones live a very, very long time, they're more of the climax forest. So these are Julia Phelps, and they're great pollinated plants. The buds come out and they flower. They're really pretty. Julia Phelps. This one here is the opposite. This plant here is probably several hundred years old. I know of one of these that it's been documented that it's over 500 years old. And this one grows in partial shade to full shade. And it's hard to get in it. It's incana, Ceanothus incana, or the coast whitethorn. They have beautiful white flowers that are fragrant, very fragrant. It has beautiful white stems as well. I like to plant them like along a driveway or whatever, because at night, this is what they look like at night. When the lights flash on them, they're really interesting looking, bright white leaves and the flowers. And see how the stems are white? The undersides of the leaves are also sort of a bluish white. It's very interesting. But this is a hard one to find in the trade. But one of these days it'll be more available. It's just difficult to propagate.
What's it called?
The coast whitethorn.
Coast.
Yeah. The fragrance of it is really wonderful, and they get totally covered with pollinators too.
It grows wild all over Jasper Ridge if you can get a hike in there.
Yeah, all over the Santa Cruz Mountains, or throughout the Santa Cruz. And it's not like everywhere, but ridge tops, you can find a lot more of them. But throughout, but it does grow in the shade, this one. So it prefers the shade. This is probably my favorite, the one that I use the most of all the ceanothus. This one, it's as pretty as the Dark Star and Julia Phelps, but it's much smaller and it lives for much longer. So this is called concha ceanothus. And I use a lot of these. It only grows to about 3 to 4 feet. I've seen that there's a couple others that are out there in the trade that are, that are being sold as concha that are not concha, in my opinion, that get much larger. But this one here is really the concha, and it gets 3 to 4 feet, and it gets a really nice shape to it, sort of a nice flow to it. Okay, yeah, here's, you can see it a little bit better here. But this is it. And this is in a sidewalk strip at my nursery, and I live in the barrio, in the inner city. This sidewalk strip gets a lot of traffic, so we have to have things that are really tough. When we first moved in there, every day we'd get to the nursery and people would have unloaded truckloads of trash on the sidewalk here, on the sidewalk strip. So with that to deal with, the nursery was just an empty lot that was filled with trash when we took it over. So, but the things that we have in the sidewalk strip have to be really tough, and it's really looking nice this year. It's really beautiful. Excuse me. This is a Julia Phelps. This is very close to the Dark Star. Almost impossible to tell them apart. But Julia Phelps is more of a shrub, whereas Dark Star gets to be more of a very large shrub or a small tree. Some of the ceanothus, like this one, this is Wheeler Canyon. One of the really nice features is that before it flowers, for a month to 6 weeks beforehand, it has these pink buds, and it goes from pink buds to blue flowers. I'll show. There's another picture later on that will show you with both. But you get so it really extends the beautiful season of that one. Wheeler Canyon, it's called. Oops, very fuzzy picture. But they grow really well together, ceanothus and manzanitas. Here's another one. This is one of the pajaro manzanitas. This is a very easy shrubby manzanita to grow. It's one of the pajaro manzanitas. This one is called Paradise, and it gets the nice deep red colors in it. Warren Roberts is very similar. It's another pajaro. That one stays a little bit smaller and gets more orange in it, whereas this one gets more red. Paradise. But this is a medium size, a real shrubby one. Gets to about 6-7 feet, and that's it. Although, once again, because they grow their entire life, I saw a Warren Roberts that was 25 feet tall once, but that was very unusual. So this one also takes some pruning. I wanted to mention again the back 40. Another really good combination for back 40 is the Joyce Coulter ceanothus. This is Joyce Coulter, which has a sky blue flower, and this is a sandhill sage. But what's really done well in this bed, this is a lot next to a veterinarian, which hired me to. It was just filled with weeds all the time. It was a fenced-in lot, so she hired me to just put in a few things that could take over from the weeds. And now it's covered with this and the amethyst bluff, purple sage, and the Joyce Coulter, and it's completely lush, filled with that. Weeds cannot grow there, so really nice. This is a local one that we see up on Mount Diablo a lot, and in the Santa Cruz Mountains too. This is Cuniata or deer brush. This one is also fragrant. There's going to be some new ones of these, some new selections of these coming out probably in the next few years. I think we're going to do one too that have very long pedicels. The pedicel is the long stem of the flower, and the pedicels get bright pink on some of them, so they're pink and white, really pretty. So, and now the buckwheats. How are we doing on time, by the way?
It's 2:50, so we have, yeah.
Oh wow, we're really fast. Okay.
Yeah.
Slow down a little bit. So the buckwheats, as I mentioned before, there's something like close to 200 species in California. For me, it's an iconic look of California. Are the buckwheats? They just have a real look of California to me. along with the manzanitas. They come in many different colors, many different forms and shapes, and they cross very easily. Here you can see there's 3 different crosses that are coming up in here. This is the pure species here of the coast buckwheat, latifolia, and here's the rosy buckwheat or the red buckwheat here. These are the only 2 that are pure species. This is crossing, and this is crossing with Ella Nelson's yellow with the nudum. So they cross very easily. And I grow so many different buckwheats in gardens that I get a lot of interesting crosses in my gardens. This is a coastal sage in the middle, which coastal sage, just a wild coastal sage, is fine to use in the garden, but they look pretty rangy pretty quickly. So I always end up cutting them down. Like every year I cut them down to the ground and let them grow back, and they stay fairly neat that way. Or you can put a really nice selection like this one, which is called Montara, which has a really nice horizontal branching pattern and doesn't get too big. It's very easy. This white leaf thing is one of the amethysts. That's the amethyst bluff sage when it's not flowering. More buckwheats, and these are crosses here. And these flower all summer long. They start flowering. Well, some of them have started flowering already a little bit, depending on what kind of buckwheat. Some of them have a big flowering in the spring, but most of them are summer flowering. So you get a really nice color all summer. And then even as they go by, I'll show some pictures of them when they turn a russet color. They can be very nice too. This is the coast buckwheat, latifolia. We have tons of these right now at the nursery too. These are so easy, and they really add to a garden. At the beginning, I showed a garden that had like this octopus-like plant. That's one of these. They can get a very different forms to them, but they get really pretty big, solid flower heads on them. So this is nudum. We have a ton of nudums right now too. Nudum is really great for anywhere it's really hot and dry. These, in general, when people ask me where they should put the buckwheat in the garden, I tell them that the hottest part of the garden, where it's really hot, that's where they like to be. And they just really flourish under those conditions. Although they look beautiful in the Bayside around Oakland, San Francisco, they look the best and do the best in Pleasanton and that area over there where it's really hot. And there I've seen, the rosy buckwheats, I've seen them get 10 feet across, a single one of them. Generally around in the coastal areas, they get 2-3 feet. Nudum is about 2 feet tall. This is a nudum. There's different kinds of nudums too. This gets pretty complicated. This is another nudum here, the white one, and this is the one that we have a lot of right now. But this one gets about 2.5 feet tall. This one here gets about under 2 feet, I'd say, 1.5 feet tall. And the rosy buckwheats get about 1 foot to 1.5 feet tall. Although we have one selection that we're growing that stays really short. The flowers stay really short on it, and it's a nice one too. That's our hybrid one that are at the nursery.
How long does it flower? Like from winter?
All summer. From spring all through summer. Okay. So really, sometimes it depends on what kind they are, but in general, they flower all summer, especially if you have a few different kinds, and then you get them, because some of them start earlier than others flowering. Okay. So this is Ella Nelson's yellow. It's another nudum buckwheat, and growing here with the red buckwheat. And then they ended up being with sort of a pale yellow, and some of them came up salmon colored after that. So here's the rosy buckwheat. Here I have it growing with that what is it, the sand dune sage, the dune sage right here, which is actually an artemisia, as is this one. This is another selection of the coastal sage on the right-hand side. This one is flat, a prostrate one, and it's called Canyon Gray. So here's one.
Is the sand dune sage fire prone?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. No. And in fact, the fire prone really, and even manzanitas, the whole thing about fire prone, there's some really good information out there that's coming out, but not all of what you read is correct. Okay, it depends on the amount of humidity that a plant has in the leaves, how much moisture is in them. So I always tell people, if you're in an area that is fire prone, or if you're next to a wildlands or something, what you really want to do is you want to just give everything a light shower once a month, just enough to get the dust off the leaves. That's the best way to maintain your garden, keep the moisture level up just enough to not be fire prone, and to really just be much safer that way. And we're much more beautiful that way too. It keeps everything looking pretty fresh too. Just enough to get the dust off the leaves. You don't want it to be sinking into the soil around a lot of these things. They don't like that.
Yeah.
Here in the city, we did this garden. This is quite a few years ago now, but this was in an area out in the dunes, out in the Sunset District, where there was major gophers that would just destroy everything in these gardens all around there, just totally turning things up. So what we did was we did this mosaic using stone like this that were fairly tightly together, and then we planted in between the stones. So there's just little teeny holes in between there where we planted them from. And it did really well for a long time. I went by there the other day for the first time in at least 10 years, and it's a driveway now, unfortunately. They have the whole front of the house is all driveway. There's no more front garden or anything.
Oh dear.
This is a lupin in the back, a silverbush lupin. Actually, it's a dune lupin, the Lupinus chamasonus. And this is a large manzanita. I think it's Austin Griffith's manzanita. So buckwheats galore. This is our selection of the really low growing one. This low growing one, and so far it's come true to seed. It's their third year this year, so we'll see. But it stays low like this, and it hangs over walls really nicely, hangs over planters really nicely. It's just a great one. This is the ash leaf buckwheat. This one is really nice gray shrub year round. Looks great as a really nice gray shrub, and gets covered with flowers. This is the largest buckwheat now, and it's actually called the East Bay Wilds buckwheat. We didn't name it, but I gave it the scientific name. It's a hybrid that we found at the nursery that grows to 8 feet tall. The person that did the buckwheat section of the North American flora wrote to me and asked me if I would like to name it. He'd like to put it in the flora because he sees potential use for it in the future. And he was a wonderful man. He ended up doing it, and it was the last entry he did in the North American flora. And he was a lot of people say that he was the last of the old time botanists. So I feel really privileged to have been part of that, part of his legacy. So
he was one of those explorers who went and.
Yep, and he did it for like 70 years. Really
wow.
Cool. Yeah, and this is one he named it the East Bay Wilds buckwheat. It's
very nice.
Really tall. This is probably my favorite buckwheat to use, the Santa Cruz Island buckwheat. I use it in landscapes like I use manzanitas, a lot of them. And these have a really nice architecture to them. They look gorgeous year round. There's not a season when they don't look really, really fine. The flowers are white, and then here they're starting to go by, but they turn this nice russet color. The russet color and then the glaucous leaves is really nice. The structure of them, they prune really interesting, like manzanitas too. You can show the structure by pruning off the branches on one side. It's just a beautiful shrub in the garden, and they can be quite large. In fact, the largest ones I've seen though are from they're ones that are grown in Livermore, where it's really, really hot, and it can take the mucky soils and everything out there. But this is one in a garden in Berkeley. We have them growing along the side of this path. These have been there for a long, long time. I take care of some of these up the road from me here, some of these that are 45 years old or 35 years old. So they can live a very long time. It's not like, there's hardly any perennials in your garden that will live that long. So, but here in the background is a Mount Diablo manzanita we planted, box elder. Here it is also. This is the path going to the front of the house. Manzanitas here. These are the Santa Cruz Island buckwheats.
Pete, can the Santa Cruz Island buckwheats be pruned to keep them a bit smaller?
They don't get so big in the coastal areas. This is about as big as they get around here. But like Livermore, I don't know why. I guess it's the heat over there that they get really big like that. And these ones can be kept pruned. But once again, the leaves are only on the ends of the branches, so you've got to prune it correctly. You can remove branches entirely, or you can cut in that leafy zone at the top to get them to be smaller and fuller. I think it should work pretty well. We've never had to do that. So here's an up close of the flowers. And this is the East Bay Wilds buckwheat again. the monster. And then there are all kinds of weird ones too, buckwheats. This is the long stem buckwheat, which actually can be very interesting in the landscape as well. You get all of these stems that they come up, the stems die to the ground in the wintertime, or die pretty close to the ground, and then they come up really quickly. And it's like every day you see they're a foot longer. And you get this big tangle of them. They're really interesting to look at. And then all the little flowers open up on them, all the pink flowers. It's really neat.
So do all of them grow in pots, or only some of them can?
No. In fact, buckwheats for pots, I try everything in pots. I like growing things in pots, but really buckwheats are for the ground in the nursery. So this is just a little annual one that I grow. I grow by seed every year, and it's just interesting looking. It's really interesting. It has a really interesting effect planted along paths and stuff in a garden where you plant a bunch of it out, the seed out, and it looks like pink smoke along the paths. So
can you say something about that cool pot that?
Oh, this one here? I have another picture of it later on, and I'll talk about it, and where you can see the whole thing. It's a head planter that I had at the nursery. Somebody finally talked me out of it for $300. So here's this is one of the sulfur buckwheats. This is one that I've been growing this particular plant for 7 or 8 years. Somebody gave it to me. It was from their property in the Sierra, and it didn't do much for 7 or 8 years until this year. And it just really bloomed for a long time this year. The bloom is just beginning to go by now. So, and it's been blooming for like 2 months. So, real beautiful one. But it's one of the sulfur buckwheats. There's many different ones of those. And in the corner here, you see a Dudleya noma, or a munchkin Dudleya. That's one I love growing in pots. It's a really beautiful, long-lived Dudleya. It looks great year-round, or most of the time, I should say. It does have a downtime for a short period. But here's another little one in this pot. I grow a lot of these. I love those. Really neat. This is crocatum. And this one, although we had one in a pot for 10 years, they're difficult in containers. So really, in the ground is best. And these can get 3 feet across. This one, the conejo buckwheat, can live for a very long time. I've seen them, 20 years old. So, and doing beautifully.
Pete, do you do anything when a plant is in a pot for so long? Do you renew the soil, or what?
Yeah.
What goes?
Yeah, like this one, every 3 or 4 years, I would take it out of the pot, untangle the roots, remove the outer roots, remove the film of roots that it gets on the edges, and refresh the soil, give it new soil. And even then, it almost died like every couple of years, but I managed to keep it alive for like 10 years or so, and then it died. So, these are just to show leaves in wintertime of different buckwheats. A lot of them are really, really attractive in the winter. These are different ones. This is the Bear Lake buckwheat. This is the Donner Pass buckwheat, and this is the coastal buckwheat, latifolium, which does really well around here and is really interesting in the garden. Here's another one that does really well. This is parvifolium, the cliff buckwheat. And this is from like Big Sur. There's huge terraces in Big Sur, just these enormous marine terraces that are completely covered with these parvifolium, the cliff buckwheats, for all summer long. And when you see them, they range in color from really deep pinks to whites, and they're very easy to grow. They can get quite large in the garden, like 6 feet across, 8 feet across each, very easily within a year. This is a nice diminutive one that is another local endangered species. This is the I don't know the common name for it, the Bahia forma one, we call it. This is the St. Catherine's lace. This is one of the largest ones, besides the East Bay Wild one. But this is a really pretty one too. I love using this in landscape. It grows to this in 1 year. It grows to this size in 1 year, and it's as tall as I am.
Does it get unwieldy, like spreading, too wide?
I don't find that the case at all. Occasionally, it'll be if it gets in the way, we just remove that section of it. But I just love them. So here it is a little bit. You can see the structure in it more in this garden. And here you can see some of them get this type of a structure. I think this one is actually from Baja. So, but it's the giganteum, the St. Catherine's leaf. This one is taller than me. This one. Here it is up close.
Wow.
And the leaves turn white over time too, over summer. They go from green to white. And then at the end of summer, the flowers have gone by for the most part, and they turn this nice russet color with white leaves. And it's a really nice combination of colors, you know? So don't discount the seeds. And they are prolific seeders too. This is the spent buckwheat flowers on a latifolium, or maybe it's a parvifolium, the cliffside one. There's another one of this. And here you can see the whole pot on that one. So it was made by the woman. I actually spoke to the woman that made it on the phone, this elderly lady from North Carolina. And she did a series of these many years ago. She doesn't do pottery anymore, so they're not made anymore, unfortunately. I love this pot. Here's this. I have it growing with at this time with one of the what's it called, the Santa Cruz Island buckwheat.
Are the pots out of concrete or
no? It's pottery. This is pottery. It's just, it has layers and layers of texture on it to give it this lichen encrusted look to it. It's a great pot. But here's the common one, the Shasta sulfur buckwheat, which has been difficult to get this year, but it's a very easy one in the garden. It can take water or not have water, but it does do really, really well in the garden. We use a lot of these too, and even in more formal gardens. So I'm going to jump into the sages. Here's the hummingbird sage again. We spoke a little bit about it back a little bit. This is just to show the wide variety of sages that there are. And the hummingbird sage is a ground cover one for partial shade, and it grows really beautifully up on Mount San Bruno in South San Francisco, where it gets a lot of fog. It just looks gorgeous and lush and beautiful. But it also grows on Mount Diablo under the oaks, and it's beautiful for a short period of time there. So, but it does need more shade. It needs some shade, some sun. Here's this is a hybrid. This is a Poso Blue between the Cleveland sage and the purple sage. It's a very nice, well-behaved hybrid. It doesn't get as big as the Cleveland sage, but it has a really nice fragrance of the Cleveland sage. This is
What is it called?
Poso Blue, Pozo Blue sage.
Also.
Doesn't get, I mean, the thing about sages is some of these, the Cleveland sages, like Allen Chickering and those things, they can get really big, like 12, 14 feet across. So when people say that they want to do a little native plant garden in a corner of their garden, you know, I say, well, you have room for one plant, you know, if you want a sage, because it fills up the whole corner. And they do. The Cleveland sages, which this is half Cleveland sage. I'll show some other ones. It looks just like that. This is a Cleveland sage here. And they just get enormous, which is great for covering the ground where you have a lot of weeds coming up or something to outcompete the weeds. This is a good one. So this works really well with the Joyce Coulter ceanothus, the purple sage, and the Cleveland sage. These ones are the most fragrant, and the pollinators and the bees go nuts over it. So I love the smell too. So that's Cleveland. There's another Cleveland sage. So, and I do like to plant them where the light comes through. A lot of these plants, you know, a lot of the best plants, they really look great when the light comes through them at certain times of the day. So I try to think of that when I'm designing gardens too. This is one that I love to use, but it's difficult to propagate. It's difficult in the garden. This is the Sonoma sage. And it's a really beautiful ground cover, nice tight ground cover. I've got some good pictures of it coming up too. But it's one that it can't be in, it likes to be where it's hot and dry, but it likes to be where it gets shade for probably half the day, at least half the day. So you've got to figure that out where you're planting it. It did really well for me in San Jose, where there was a big tree next door that shaded it. So it had bright shade, and it spread all over that area. So that was good.
Is this a more compact, like 1 to 2 feet tall, or
1 foot tall or less?
Oh.
The leaves stay flat to the ground, so the leaves are only about
we
get to about 6 inches tall. That's it.
Which sage is this again?
Sonoma sage, but it's very
Sonoma.
difficult to find.
Creeping sage, yeah.
Creeping sage or Sonoma sage, yeah, same thing. But it grows from Sonoma all the way from Sonoma to all down south too. But it likes hot, dry locations, but where it gets half a day's shade. This is the white sage. These ones, these are really nice to use in the garden because they have most of the year they have just the white leaves here at the base that are very extremely fragrant. It's what they make the sage sticks out of the base, and that stays fairly compact. But then when it flowers, it sends up these flower stalks that can be, 7, 8, 9 feet tall. So once again, I love drama in the garden. I love things that bring a lot of change throughout the year and really, show you the season that we're in too. But that's what I mean by drama, I guess. So here it is in flower. This is a large commercial landscape we did in San Ramon. And then the building was sold, and the new owner and we didn't really hit it off. So he got a different landscaper who pruned everything into lollipops. The whole garden.
Oh my God.
And half the things died. And then the owner called me and tried to get me to go back. I don't know. So this is the purple sage. This is the amethyst bluff here. Purple sage. And this is one that is the most reliable one to look, and it looks good year round. When it's not flowering, it has very, very white leaves. So it looks like a really white, nicely formed, nicely shaped white shrub. And it doesn't get out of control, although it can get fairly big. I really like amethyst bluff, and I like one called Point Sal spreader too. Point Sal spreader is one of those that you can grow with a joist coulter and the really big things that spread quickly to cover for weed cover to outcompete the weeds. It's an excellent one for that. So, but they can all get easily 10 feet across. So this is the purple sage again. And this is it also. So see how it has naturally a very neat appearance to it. This is nice. I like growing it with the joist coulter, with the amethyst bluff, or with the purple sage, the point cell spreader. Either one is good. The point cell spreader gets kind of this rolling look, and it can grow extremely large. And it gets to about 2.5, 3 feet tall. And the thing about the purple sages, it's one of the purple sages, is that they look pretty decent year round, and you can give them a little bit of water. Whereas the Cleveland sage, as beautiful as it is, it looks really dead for quite a long time in the year. So you have to balance these things. But the point cell spreader gets this rolling wave look to it. It's really neat. And
they short-lived, or do they live do they last more than?
Purple sages are very long-lived. The Cleveland sages, if you don't water them, they can be very long-lived, although they look dead half the season, so half the year. So, but the purple sage is very, very long-lived. Yeah. Madrone. Here's madrones. I absolutely love these. Also in the Ericaceae family. I have this love affair with things that are in this family, the Ericaceae family. Other things in the family are like huckleberries, blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons. I mean, I think a lot of us have love affairs with them. But I plant a lot of these in landscapes too. And not many landscapers do that because they are risky, and I do let people know that there's a risk involved in planting them. They often don't make it. They don't transplant well. They don't make it through their first year. If you can make it through 2 years, though, it's a fairly fast-growing, very beautiful, beautiful tree for the garden. People say all these different things about the conditions and stuff, and I've seen all of those things, sort of all the rules broken. But in general, to plant them, it's that first year or two that you need to get them through. And what I do is I plant them where the roots, and when they're small, they're in the shade, but within a year, they grow up into the sun. Okay, and then they're going to be in pretty much full sun after that. They generally do well that way. We don't lose that many anymore, although sometimes we do. Some places they just don't want to be there. So, but there's a saying: if you want a madrone, plant two, and it's true. Sorry, I have to.
Does the strawberry bush, strawberry tree, is that a native?
No, that's the Mediterranean one.
Okay. So that one is not native at all.
It's not native at all. No.
Okay.
It's very easy, but and they're pretty. But
yeah.
It's not. It's the Mediterranean one. It's one of the Mediterranean ones. But the Pacific madrone, it's called in Great Britain they call it the Queen of Trees, And it really is. And because they were introduced there from California here 200 years ago. And there's even a society that goes around taking care of them, the old ones. And they're huge there. They've gotten huge. They do, who would have thought, but they do really well. So here I saw one, I might have a photo of it coming up, but look how beautiful the berries are. The berries are very delicious too. There's some really good food things you can make with them. They dry really well and make that roll-up, sticky roll-ups and stuff really well. But they're just so beautiful. The bark and leaves, the flowers on them, the berries. Somebody called me a couple years ago and said that they had one growing in their backyard that's been there for a long time. And so I said, well, next time I'm in San Jose, I'll go take a look. So I went and took a look, and I walked into the backyard, and there's this enormous, like 80-foot tall madrone with a trunk that was just huge. I mean, the trunk was probably, the circumference was, I didn't enter, it was like 15 feet or something around it. I mean, it was huge, huge tree. I've seen madrones get much, much bigger than that. Up in Honeydew, up in Mendocino County, the largest one ever was right next to the street there. And that thing had a circumference of, I don't know, 40 feet or something. Each branch on it was like bigger than I can stretch my hands just across it. I mean, they get, and that's what they get bigger up there for sure. They don't get that big in yards. They tend to get like 25 feet, maybe 30 feet. But they definitely are the center of attention in the yard. So, but this one, and it had a lawn all around it, an irrigated lawn all around it. So go figure, about people saying don't water them and stuff. And it's true, you don't want to water them much. You want to be very judicious about watering for the first 2 years. And you got to do it by hand, and only every 2-3 weeks. So no more than that. But then, and you want to water it from near the base, not right at the base. There's all these little rules, but they're worth it. So the Pacific madrone is really the most beautiful tree.
Very nice.
Do you know anything about its lineage? And it doesn't seem to look like any other California plant, and
Well,
doesn't.
It's related to manzanitas.
Okay.
It's Ericaceae. Okay. It's related to manzanitas, but the funny thing is, and manzanitas, by the way, that there's like 66 species of manzanitas. In the world, there's like 75 species of manzanitas, and 66 of those are found only in California. So that's how this is the cradle of evolution for manzanita here in California. There was a time about 25-30 million years ago where California was really, it was an ericaceous state or place, region where it had nothing but ericaceous plants. So the climate at that time was just perfect for ericaceous plants. They like the very poor soils. They like sandy, very poor soils. They can grow in clay and everything else, but generally that's what they love is sandy soils, and they grow much faster in sandy soils too. And they can even grow in the completely impoverished soils that nothing else can grow in. But they like those conditions. And what happened is over time, those conditions tended to migrate towards ridge tops through, different climate change and even the geographical change of uplifting and stuff. So soon, just the ridge tops all across California were covered with manzanitas and madrones. And then those ridges, they became disjunct from one another, and that's how we have so many different species. And across California, practically every ridge region has a species of manzanita that is found only there. So we have all these rare species of manzanitas on these ridge tops all across the state. And manzanitas grow everywhere in the state except for the San Joaquin Valley. And so they're really widespread. They can take lots of different conditions. They can take lots of snow. What was that?
How are they related to rhododendrons and azaleas?
Okay, well, they're the Ericaceae family. So they have the same ancestors. Okay, and madrone and manzanita, even though they're both found, where they evolved here in California, they're actually the Pacific madrone is much more closely related to the madrones in the Mediterranean than it is to manzanitas. Okay, so they're not that they're not all that close, madrones and manzanitas, although they do share a lot of, they love the same environments, and they share a lot of things. So.
Pete,
Yeah.
I've heard that madrones grow super slow, like maybe 1 inch a year or so.
No,
Is
not at all. They can be very fast too. They can be very, very fast. In the beginning, they can be slow, but once they're established, they can grow. I've seen them grow several feet a year. So I've had them grow, ones that I've planted from that big, who grew that quickly. So they can, it's kind of a myth. Manzanitas in general are slow, and the smaller the leaf, the slower they are in general, manzanitas. So, but really all manzanitas for garden plants, they're pretty slow. So you've got to really, when you're designing your garden, when you're figuring out where to plant them, make sure you keep in mind the mature size of them and give them that much space, okay? I don't say that, I tend to plant things fairly closely in the garden to get a nice lush look, but manzanitas, as far as like the space, like above ground, above 3 feet anyway, for the bigger ones, you want to make sure you give them plenty of space to grow to their full extent, because that's the way they're most beautiful that way. And they don't like being shaded out by other things. If you do happen to have, like some of the manzanitas can be grown under trees, but you want those branches limbed up very high above them. They want bright shade, and they don't want leaves, branches that are come close to them in general. Manzanitas or madrones are the same. Generally, if the branches of another tree or shrub come close to it, those branches will die back and the other branches will thrive and grow. So, any more madrone questions? So I've seen, I have some pictures somewhere. I don't think I have them in this, on this presentation, where the madrones are, some years in some areas are completely covered with berries, so you can't even see their leaves. They're solid red and really beautiful. So this is a plant that I wanted to talk about because it's so easy, and it's such an easy way to grow something bright and colorful and cheery in shady areas. And often people's entrances to their homes are shady. And this is a really easy one to grow. And I always tell people, just, get like 3 or 4 or 5 of these and plant them around the shady area, and just they're going to flower and do well all winter, and then through spring until about now. And you can water them now and then to get them bigger. They'll keep on going if you water them into the end of summer almost. But then eventually they're going to die back to the ground. But don't remove them when they die. You can hardly see them when they die. They really shrivel up and disappear almost. But you want to leave them so that all the seed gets dispersed. And these will spread and make beautiful borders, even in pretty deep shade. So the Spring Beauty is a really good one. This is Petrolia Pink. It's a very nice pink one. They come in white or pink.
It's like a ground cover spreading.
It's a spreading ground cover, but it disappears in summer. So without water, it disappears in summer. With water, it disappears at the end of summer. But it's a really nice way to brighten up dark areas of the garden. And the understory. The understory, I really work, when I'm doing gardens, I like to work, when we start off, if it's a blank slate, everything is the same size, but I try to aim towards having an upper story, an understory, and then the ground cover. Okay, I try to work with all of those to bring a nice, harmonious, integrated garden.
Pete, this is too tall for between stepping stones, right?
This year, yeah, it is, although it doesn't hurt. I mean, it stays small for a while, and it'll flower and it's pretty and stuff, and then eventually it's going to get stepped on. It doesn't take being stepped on well, but it's fine to have between stepping stones. If you're walking on it, they'll remove themselves from in between, from where you step. Here's another one of my favorites to use. This is the Colville's lip fern. It's a local endangered species and slow to grow, but I love doing containers with them mainly. But in the ground, they do really well only if they're near manzanitas and a big rock. Don't ask me why, but they always need a big rock in the ground when they're in the ground. That's in the wild. That's how they grow too. Like this here, see, it has a big rock here, and these are the manzanitas. There's 2 different kinds of manzanitas here, both ground cover ones. So the ground cover manzanitas, we have the that can take a fair amount of shade are the uva ursis or the kinnick. That's actually It's this one over. There's 3 different kinds of manzanitas here. It's this one over here. You can hardly see it in this picture. Somewhere I have some pictures of it, but it's another ground cover one. And there's many different ones of the uva ursis, the kinnikinics. There's many different ones as well. But that one can take probably more shade than any. But it's a ground cover one. So these are other things that we've experimented with, and we grow in yards. This is the prostrate golden bush here. Real reliable, real attractor for pollinators, easy. And in the summer, just as most things are starting to look a little bit peaked, a little bit past their prime and a little bit dried up even, this one turns bright green in the middle of summer, and then suddenly it flowers in the nice yellow flower all over it. So it's a nice one. This is a beautiful one. This is a close relative of that. This is the golden fleece. And these can get quite large. They can get up to like 8 feet or so, or even more than that. But they have these beautiful green foliage that the hotter and drier it gets, the prettier, the more beautiful green, lush, feathery it gets. And then at the end of the second half of summer, it gets these yellow flowers all over it. So here's another fern. I love using ferns. This is a fern that I use a lot. And this is an Aspidotus densa, or the serpentine lace fern. The California lace fern and the serpentine lace fern are very similar. I use both of them. They're difficult to find, difficult to get. They're not cheap, but they're very long-lived. And in this photo here, you can see where I planted it in a garden not too far from here. And it just looks really neat year-round. Next to this is one of the Shasta sulfurs after the flower's gone by. Here's another one that we've started using just in the last couple of years. This is Chaparral P. It's a local native. You find it up on Mount Tam, Mount Diablo, and it would have been found around the hills and stuff here, but pretty much disappeared, I think, from the hills here. But it's easy to grow. It can be a little bit invasive, so you have to kind of watch it with these. But boy, they get beautiful in the wintertime.
What is it called again?
It's the Chaparral P, or Picaringia.
Okay.
Yeah, and it can get quite large, spiny shrub too. So you have to have room for something that can get quite large, and they spread by underground runners, so they'll take over an area of the yard for sure. You kind of need a big yard for them.
Do you use maidenhair ferns?
The one I use is the southern maidenhair fern. The horseshoe maidenhair fern or the 5-finger fern is difficult. That one I think needs running water, fresh running water. So if somebody has a stream going through their property, I'll try to use it, but otherwise I use the southern maidenhair fern, which is just much easier. You just need to add water regularly for them.
Pete, so ferns are not a plant you can give gray water to, is that right?
No. Well, I mean, some of them you can give them to bracken fern, lady fern will take it. Lady ferns are the fastest growing ferns. You can get really huge, lush clumps of lady fern in a single season by giving it enough water and sun. So they can grow in full sun to full shade, and they can get really huge quickly. And they're really elegant, but they do die back in the winter to the ground. They disappear in the winter, and then they come back like boom, really quick and big in the summer. It's an easy one. Some fern, not all ferns though, need water or want water. Like the lip fern I showed you a little while ago, and the Aspidotus, the lace fern. Those ones don't like much water. They need a little bit to get going, but just a little bit. And they needed the right amount of sun and shade is what they really need. So the buckeyes, I love using buckeyes in landscapes. I think they're the most beautiful trees, and they get this really white bark in the wintertime, and they lose their leaves in the summertime. But to me, it's just as attractive when they lose their leaves like this. This is the largest one on record I found near the Point Reyes Bird Observatory. The trunk on this thing at chest high on the other side of it is 14 feet across. It's huge, and it's just got this really cool shape. So that, yeah, and even after they lose their leaves, they get the big old seed pods like this. They're just a really neat tree. They flower like crazy, incredibly fragrant, and they tend. What I like about them is I've seen these kept as a hedge, as like a 5-foot hedge. Absolutely beautiful. Even when it lost its leaves, it was just this tangle of, sorry, it's motorcycle, but the tangle of white branches is really attractive and beautiful too. But I love when the leaves come out. And talk about seasonal drama. These ones are sort of the masters of that. You know, when the leaves come out, they're this beautiful chartreuse color. They're really pretty leaf buds that open up. So
is buckeye, is any part of it poisonous or toxic for?
It is poisonous. It is toxic. There's the entire thing, all of it, the bark, everything. But there's hardly any cases of it causing anybody any harm, because it's so bitter that everybody and everything that tastes it spits it right out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and before they get any toxic kind of a dose from it.
Yeah.
The confusing thing is that it's the second most important food source it was the second most important food source for the Ohlone and the coastal native tribes of California, indigenous people. But the way that it was, they used the seeds, and they really used it mainly when there was a bad year for acorns, when there wasn't enough acorns. Because you take the seeds of the buckeye and they would leach them for a long time, like 6 weeks, in streams, you know, in baskets or in streams, and it leaches out all the toxins. And then they roast them for low roasting for a long time, and then they get this masa type of food from it, and it's very, very important. You know?
It's like a soup?
No, it's a masa. It's like a mush.
Mush. Okay.
Yeah. So they made them with that, and they made them with the soaproot lilies too, which we also use a lot in landscape, soaproot lilies.
Yeah.
Now here's one that it's a local from Mount Diablo in Livermore area that I like to use too, and it's a really neat shrub called the desert olive. Very, very tough, really, really tough plant that makes a really interesting screen that turns bright green when the leaves come out. It loses the leaves, but it has white bark, and it has these really nice swooping branches. So planted in a row, they look kind of like dancing people, the way the branches grow. In the shade, they can grow really, really tall and big, but in the sun, they stay to a really nice foil because of the bright chartreuse green leaves. So it's a nice thing to plant red things and red flowering things again.
There's also a red dogwood, right?
This is the brown dogwood here. It's called the brown dogwood, but it's very red in summertime. So this one is the most drought tolerant of the dogwoods. Flowers beautifully and produces berries beautifully. The birds love dogwoods. So, and they love the desert olive too. So this is a nice combination of the brown dogwood and the desert olive.
But you're right, Ruhina, there is a red twigged dogwood.
Yeah. It's supposed to have very beautiful, dramatic twigs. Like
I use it. I use that one a lot too. The red twig dogwoods. And the way that I use them is like in yards that have a fair amount of moisture, period, like in parts of Oakland and Berkeley are pretty moist. And if there's a shady area, like in between two houses, it's a narrow little area, I'll do a whole alley of red twig dogwoods, which are just beautiful. And then I have them like, they just grow up and around. They grow up to the sky, up above the height of the house. And they make a nice arched walkway all by themselves, just prune the branches out of the way. And it's not a lot of pruning. But generally the red in the bark is really, really beautiful when the twigs are only, in their first 2 years. And then after that, the bark doesn't get that brilliant red color. So what I do is every few years, I'll cut them to the ground and let them grow back. They grow back denser and redder than ever. So,
and how much space do they need, like width-wise?
They'll fill up whatever space you give them. If you give them 50 feet, they'll fill that. But if you give them, 5 feet, they'll fill that too. So, and they don't need a lot of sun. And the way the light filters through them is really attractive. Very, very beautiful. I love using the red twig dogwoods in landscapes. But they do require some water. So, yeah. Okay, coffee ferns, bird's foot ferns. These are both local ferns I like to use. Here's the coffee fern in the wintertime. Gets this beautiful glaucous color to it. And the bird's foot ferns turns almost white in the summertime. Here I have it growing up in the stairway here, during the corner of the stairway. And then this is an aster that we introduced. It's the Pacific aster, which there's a lot of them out there. But this one stays really low. We call it plumous purple because I found it in Plumas County, but it just has a really nice color to it and spreads nicely. Well, you got to be careful with asters; they can spread a lot, but you can limit their spread by the amount of water you give them. But this one stays low and pretty neat all the time, whereas most of the asters, they'll get really beautiful and flower really nicely, and then as soon as they've gone by, they're ugly as sin until you cut them down. So, but this one doesn't get quite that ugly. So it looks pretty good, actually. Here's more of that leafy reedgrass here. This is the Nootka reedgrass on the right. This is the leafy reedgrass on the left. We have another one that we're growing now too, which is the serpentine reedgrass, which is really gorgeous and it's worked out really well in some gardens, including my own, and not so well in others. It's disappeared in others. So we haven't quite figured it out yet, but it's really beautiful and it's taller, larger than this one, but beautiful plumes also. This is another introduction we did a couple of years ago. This is Erigeron, what is it? Erigeron diffusa, or the diffuse daisy. And this one, you put it in a really hot air spot of the garden, water a little bit in the beginning, and then forget about it. And it does this. It just flowers like mad. It's so much nicer than Santa Barbara daisies, in my opinion, which are not native, by the way, despite the name, and they're very invasive.
So can you repeat the name of this?
Erigeron diffusa, or diffuse daisy. Diffuse daisy.
The daisies, there's one called the African daisy. Is that a native?
No, it's from Africa.
The one, no, it looks exactly like this.
It's not native, no.
Okay.
Yeah, this one is native. These are smaller flowers, but there's lots and lots of them. So makes a really nice, hot, dry corner of the garden. I like to use the strawberries as ground cover a lot. They like to be, they're best sandy soils though. So if you have sandy soils, they're really easy. If you have clay soils, they're good too. But generally in clay soils, they're better where they get some shade and they get a little bit larger. So.
Have you used any of these on green roofs, on rooftops?
I've recommended them, but I haven't done a green roof myself. I did a green wall once. Here's different grasses that we've been experimenting with that I really like to use. And these ones, they do really well, but they definitely take over an area. These are melicas, or the mellet grasses, or also called onion grasses because they have these little onions under the soil. But the one on the left is the imperfecta, or the foothill mellet grass. And that just looks beautiful under manzanitas or under a tree or in a sidewalk strip. But they definitely take over the area given that they live in. The one on the right is the Melica californica, the California mellet grass. This has a really nice architecture to it. But it also, by the end of the summer, all the little seed stems, they look like little rice things on them. And then they disappear for a short period, and then they come back really quick in the fall. And then the prostrate snowberry, this is the upright snowberry here, but this is a prostrate snowberry here and here. I really like the prostrate snowberry. It's Symphoracarpus mollis. And I use these in shady areas. Under oaks, they're fantastic because they don't need much water at all. So, and then this is the Anopheles, the pearly everlasting. This flower, it's very easy to establish, makes these little colonies, and they glow in the moonlight. They totally glow. They're really interesting and really pretty, and it's a really good pollinator plant, really easy. Definitely they need to be cut down once a year, but I really like it.
Is there an exotic version of this that pops up in people's gardens?
Yes, it's the cudweed family. So but this is a perennial one that is much stronger than that. It's a wimpy, kind of an obnoxious little thing that there's a bunch of different kinds, and we grow like three different kinds in the garden, and they're all three are very different and special, and they all attract this really beautiful butterfly. I think it's the California sister butterfly, and they're really good at bringing them into the garden the first year even. So some butterflies, take a few years to come to your yard, but that one comes right away if you have certain ones of those cudweed family. So this is the sand aster, the silver carpet sand aster, or just sand aster. This is it. You put it in a hot, dry spot, and it just makes this nice white carpet, and then gets covered with these pink blooms in the summertime, pink and yellow blooms. It's very attractive, very easy. Nice rock garden plant. I like using these too, although these are a little bit slow. These are the ground sunflowers. We have a few different kinds. These ones are some of the Waiithias or the mule's ears. And these, you'll see them around the hills. Generally, you want to put this kind. This is the glabrata. This one you want to put where it's partial shade. It should get about a third of the day or quarter of the day of sun, and the rest of the time shade. They get about 2 feet tall or a foot tall, something like that. They slowly grow in these clumps, but they're really attractive too, both the leaves and the flowers. These are really pretty, and they can be quite long-lasting flower too. This is the Helianthellus. This is the Mount Diablo Helianthella, which is an endangered species, but we do grow it some years. I've got some coming up now, but we've got other ground sunflowers like the balsamorhizas that are coming up now that have a real strong, what is this, the fragrance of? It's a real strong, really unusual fragrance. I forget what it is, but we have those for the first time this year. It's another endangered species. This is a ceanothus that I started using a few years ago that is a really interesting one. It's the dentata or the sandhill ceanothus. If you look it up, it's supposed to get like a foot tall and make these tight little mounds, you know, but in clay, it does something totally different. It gets like 6 feet tall, 6 feet wide, and it's fairly transparent. So it's one of these things that you can see through fairly well, but it still gets these really beautiful flowers on it for quite a long time. And the flowers last much longer than on other ceanothus. So I've started using these a lot more. I really like this, the sandhill sage. Here's another ceanothus that has a real ghostly appearance to it. This is the one called Owl's Wood Blue, which we carry also. They can get very large. This is a straight species of arboreus, Ceanothus arboreus, which are from the San Diego area, but they do fantastic here. This one is in Inverness, near Point Reyes in Inverness. And it has this just wonderful, you know, lilac, ghostly appearance to it every year. So here's the largest sedge of California. There's a bunch of sedges that I like to use too. Some of them can be quite invasive, but this one is not. This one can get to, you know, 4 or 5 feet tall. It's the San Diego sedge, but it grows up into central California, but it does well around here too. And it has a nice blue-gray appearance. And I like how it looks with the John Dowley manzanita. And then, of course, the licorice ferns, which I mentioned before, and the California polypody ferns. These ones also disappear in summer. So like in that garden I told you about in Danville, where it looks beautiful in the summer and everything is lush and full of flowers and stuff. In the wintertime, it all looks dead. So you have these coming up in the ground and they're perfectly compatible. This is an interesting one. This is one that, this is the laurel sumac. This is easily twice as big as it is in the photo now, maybe 3 times. This is at my nursery. And this is the laurel sumac and it's from down south. They're not supposed to grow in Oakland, but they do fantastic in our new weather now. And this is just a huge, wonderful shade tree that underneath this tree is the center of activity in the summertime when it's really hot here. So the neighbors always gather there. I had a bench there for a long time until it disappeared. But even still, without the bench, it's still there's always a little crowd of people under there in the summer. So the laurel sumac is a very nice large shrub. It's related to the sugar bush and the lemonade berry too. And then I love using this in certain circumstances. This is the Lamus condensatus canyon prince, or the canyon prince wild rye. And these ones make a nice little hedge like this, a really beautiful hedge, but you have to have them where you can contain them somehow. I don't like these running through the garden. I like them used as an edge like this, but every year you need to break off all around it. You have to go through the ground with a spade, you know, cutting off the roots and removing anything that comes up outside. Because if they start coming up in between everything, they just look messy, in my opinion. But I always keep them like this, and they look good, really good.
Is there a variegated one of this one?
Not that's native, no.
No, okay. Very nice.
This is a combination of the island pink yarrow and the woolly blue curls. Woolly blue curls are a lot of people think including me. They're our most beautiful wildflower. They make these beautiful shrubs with extremely fragrant leaves that you can cook with. In Mexico, these are called wild oregano, or wild rosemary. I'm sorry, and they actually are closely related to rosemary. And they have these, but they're much more beautiful flowers. I wish I had more photos of these. I have a lot of photos, but I didn't put them in here. But they can be difficult. They like to be hot, dry. In some gardens, you just plant them and leave them be, and they're gorgeous for 20 years. And then other gardens, they'll be really beautiful for 1 or 2 years, and then they con. So they're not the easiest thing. And it's hard to predict what they want.
And what is the pink one?
The pink one is the island pink yarrow. It's one of our yarrows. Most of the yarrow in California is white, but this is an island pink one.
Okay.
It's from the islands down south, but it does great here too. And they intermix and they all turn pink.
Very nice.
Yeah. How are we doing on time?
Well, we exceeded time, but everybody's at least 9 of us are still on the call. But if you want to wrap up, that would be.
Yeah, my tongue is getting a little bit tired. I'm starting to. I'll just go through real quickly. This is a beautiful lupin that's found only on Cobb Mountain, or around Cobb Mountain, I should say, up in Napa. Just beautiful. The Cobb Mountain lupin. We have some right now too. And here's just some more garden pics I'll flip through. Here's a garden I did in the Castro Valley. I've become close friends with the owner, and so I visit this garden all the time, and I just love it.
Very nice.
This is a big Japanese maple that we left. It's the only thing that we left. We've slowly taken over the whole front yard, and she absolutely loves her garden. We have lots of manzanitas. It's really beautiful, real lush. Always something happening there with nature. So, this is the one in San Francisco I showed earlier, and this is the same garden in a different season. So
nice.
This is late summer, so you get all the California fuchsias and the yarrows and the beach daisies and different things. It's much bigger now. The landscape has grown a lot. This is an amazing house too. It's the nicest Eichler I've ever seen.
Very nice.
The same landscape. So, and here we did in the shade against the house here, we planted dogwoods in here that are still young in this picture. And then strawberries as the ground cover there. They look great year round, The dogwoods got a lot bigger.
Pete, I have a quick question about the strawberries.
Yeah.
There's Fragaria vesca, and then there's Fragaria
Chilense.
Yes. And which one, what's the best? How do you pick?
Well, this is the way in general that they're thought of. The wood strawberry is for shade, and this coast strawberry is for sun. Okay, but actually they both do fine in sun or shade. So, but the wood strawberry stays a little bit smaller, and it's doesn't have glossy leaves, but the leaves get a lot of orange and red in them too. Mm-hmm. So they're nice in that way. The more sun they get, the redder they get too. So they both have their drawbacks and their fabulous side. So
is one more drought tolerant than the other?
No, they both. To really get them to fill in, you need to give them some water in the first few years.
Right.
And once they're filled in, you can stop watering them. So they're very easy.
Got it.
Yeah, I think the beach strawberry does a little bit better for rooftops because it's.
It can take more of the sun. The rooftop gardens have really specific conditions that they need. They're very, very hot, and they dry out completely. So you have to have things that can take that. And the coast strawberry is one that can really take that, the searing hot sun, the drying out. So buckwheats can take it too, some of them.
Mm-hmm. Very nice.
Yeah, here, see, this is that octopus plant I showed you in the middle. I was mentioned in the middle. This is the Eriogonum latifolium, or the coast buckwheat. It's a local buckwheat and it just gets full. The one I have at the nursery, I have it growing under a redbud, on the edge of a redbud, and it just has thousands of these flower heads on it right now. It's very cool, and very, very gray leaves that turn pinkish gray in the fall. So pinkish or orangish gray.
You don't use California poppies?
What's that?
Poppies? You don't like poppies?
I love them. I use them all the time, but sometimes they can be a little bit too much. And sometimes I'm just looking for a different effect, but I use them a lot.
Okay.
So, believe me. This is a garden in the city that we did with a pine maple here. These are all shade loving. This street that this house is on, all the houses are like three stories right up to the sidewalk, no front yards. And this is a farmhouse that's set back in. This is the original farmhouse in the Castro. And it's set back in, and the garden is so beautiful. I have some more pictures of it coming up. So, oh, this is the end. I'm sorry, I don't have more pictures of it. But thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this. And I hope that it was helpful or useful and inspirational.
Oh, yes, it was. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, Pete. People say we're in another drought, and other people say you can't call it drought anymore because this is what it's going to be pretty much from here on out, or even worse. So you're using plants from Southern California, and I guess you have it in mind that the climate, is no longer as moist as it has been in the past. And then I had asked earlier about gray water, but that's generally not something seen as too compatible with most native plants, though, right?
With many, it is perfectly fine with, but you just have to know which ones to use it with. Okay, it's great for the dogwoods that we're talking about. The red twig dogwoods, they're fine with it. I like using black fruit dogwoods. I think that one can take it. All the grasses that we've talked about, they can take it. Many different things can take it. Anything that is a seaside plant can take it. Or generally, the manzanitas cannot take it. Okay, ceanothus cannot take it, but they don't want the water anyway. So those ones, the plants that we use, and really the recommendation for the goal in my gardens is to get to where all the water you need is the once a month spray down. Okay, just enough to get the dust off the leaves, and that just keeps them healthy and hydrated enough. That's the word I was trying to think of. Hydrated enough to not to burn at the drop of a match. That's what we want. So and so you want a drought tolerant garden, which California plants, most of them are very drought tolerant, and they're even tolerant to some pretty large shifts in the climate as well. Periods of much drier and then periods of moisture. However, you don't want things to be living on drought alone. You do need anything that you have growing around your house, especially if you're near wildlands or where there could be fire, you want to be able to give it that once a month spray down. So,
right.
Are they any of these? Are they fire prone? Because a lot of these fire departments are becoming very
things that are fire prone. Things that are fire prone are things that have a real buildup of leaf litter. If you don't clean out the leaf litter, maintenance is really the key to a lot of things. And also a lot of practical things, like you don't want to be creating a fire ladder leading to your roof or something like that. You want to plant low things around the house. You want to keep things fairly low. You want to have the things hydrated. But hydration, there was some tests done, some experiments done a couple years ago that showed plants are almost all the same amount of flammability. It's all about how much moisture they have versus how much dried foliage and dried material they produce. Okay, things like eucalyptus, they have a huge buildup of dried stuff because all the creatures around don't live on it. There's nothing that can live on it. There's very few things can live on it. So it builds up you get these huge, deep piles of dried materials. So that's extremely flammable. Manzanitas, you get when they're in a real thriving state, you have the right balance between critters and the plant, and that they keep that litter down. Okay, or you can blow it out. You can remove a lot of it or rake it out. So you don't have to let it build up either. So.
All right, and